The number did not reconcile. That was the thing about errors in cartographic records. They did not announce themselves. They did not flash or beep or send alerts. They sat inside spreadsheets and archive indices with the patience of something that had been waiting a very long time to be found. And on a Tuesday morning that had started with cold coffee and a broken chair hinge, I found one. My name is Va Sekar. I'm a cartographer, grade 7, assigned to the Hegemony Bureau of Territorial Survey. I have worked in this office for 22 years. I have reclassified 1,104 sectors. I have processed boundary disputes, logged resource claims, updated stellar drift corrections, and once spent 4 months untangling a filing error so old that the species who made it had evolved past caring. I do not get excited about my work. That is, in fact, the primary qualification for my work. So when I say the number did not reconcile, I want you to understand what that means for someone like me. It means I stopped. It means my coffee sat untouched for 40 minutes. It means I read the same line 6 times and each time it said the same thing, and each time the same cold, thin, very specific feeling moved through me. The way a draft moves through a room when a window opens somewhere you cannot see. The line was this: Sector 7 Auric Null, designation unknown, last updated, Year 1 Hegemony cartographic record, recommended action none. 300 years. No follow-up, no expedition logged, no resource survey, no boundary note, no reclassification request. Every other sector on that side of the map had been touched at least a dozen times since Year 1. Annexed, disputed, surveyed, flagged, corrected, handed off between departments. The normal life of map space. Sector 7, Auric Null, had sat under a single word for 3 centuries, without anyone touching it. Not uninhabited, not unclaimed, not survey pending. Unknown. I pulled the original designation file. It was old enough that the formatting did not render correctly on my current interface, and I had to run it through a legacy reader, the kind we keep installed on one machine in the back room and never use. The file loaded slowly, line by line, the way very old things move. The designation had been entered by a surveyor named Kala Oren, aboard the vessel Prevailing Standard, on the 14th day of the 3rd month of Year 1. The entry was short. Everything in Year 1 records was short because the Bureau had only just been established, and the forms had not yet grown to their current spectacular length. It read Survey initiated, Survey suspended, Designation assigned unknown, Recommended action none, Rationale they asked us not to. I read that last sentence until the words stopped looking like words. They asked us not to. Not survey incomplete, not conditions hostile, not resources insufficient to justify expedition. They asked. Someone in Sector 7, Auric Null, in Year 1, had asked the Prevailing Standard not to survey them, and Kala Oren had written that down in a bureau form, filed it, and the entire Hegemony cartographic apparatus had honored that request for 300 years without once stopping to confirm whether the request was still in effect. I filed an inquiry, standard form, Inquiry into Historical Designation, requesting review of the original rationale and recommendation for current action. I filled it out carefully. I attached the original file. I noted the 300-year gap. I submitted it. The system processed it in 4 seconds. Approved, processed, and closed. I had not received a response. There was no reviewer assigned. There was no follow-up date. The inquiry had entered the system and been swallowed whole, the way a quiet room swallows a sound. I sat back in my broken chair and listened to it creak. I had worked in this bureau for 22 years. I had never seen an inquiry auto-close. The system was not built for that. Inquiries required a review step, a minimum of 1 assigned reader, a dated response. That was not a policy I could have explained to you from memory because I had never needed to. It was simply how the system worked. It had not worked that way just now. I opened the inquiry again. The status showed closed, with a timestamp 4 seconds after my submission. The reviewer field showed a bureau process code I had never seen before. I looked it up. The code belonged to an automated administrative function last used 90 years ago, a legacy routine designed for, and here I read the description 3 times, the management of sensitive designations requiring continuity of status. Continuity of status. Someone 90 years ago had written a piece of administrative code specifically designed to make sure that if anyone ever tried to formally question Sector 7 Auric Null's designation, the question would be received, logged, and quietly buried before it reached a desk. They had not deleted the inquiry. They had not rejected it. They had approved it and closed it and moved it to a folder that would never be reviewed, because approving and closing was cleaner than rejecting, and clean was the whole point. I looked at the sector on my map display. The screen showed it the way it had shown it for 300 years, a gray zone, a soft, unremarkable square of nothing in the middle of an otherwise fully documented region. No star markings, no boundary lines, no notation. Just the label. Unknown. I had always assumed when I noticed it at all that it was a survey gap, an oversight. Space is large and resources are limited, and some sectors simply take longer to reach. I had assumed this without ever examining the assumption, which, I now understood, was exactly what the assumption was designed for. I picked up my coffee. It was completely cold. I drank it anyway, because I needed something to do with my hands, and because the alternative was to sit completely still and think about the fact that I was a 22-year veteran of the Hegemony Bureau of Territorial Survey, and I had just discovered that 300 years of institutional memory had been quietly, carefully, persistently organized around a single principle. Not looking. I put the cup down. I opened a fresh query window, and I typed the name of the vessel that had first logged the designation. The prevailing standard. The ship had been decommissioned in year 31. Its crew records were archived. I searched for Calla Oren. One result. Personal file brief, the kind given to junior survey staff who did not stay in the Bureau long. Calla Oren, cartographic assistant, assigned to the prevailing standard, year 1 through year 3. Departed service year 3. No reason given, no forwarding assignment. No personal log on file. Except, attached to the back of the file in the miscellaneous documents folder, tagged under the heading Personal Effects, was a single document, not a log, not a report, a note written and filed the day Calla Oren left service, apparently submitted to the archive as part of a routine personal record clearance. Most people submitted nothing to that folder. She had submitted 1 page. I opened it. The writing was in Old Standard, the kind with slightly different punctuation conventions, and it was short enough that I read it in full in under a minute. She wrote that the sector had responded to their initial survey ping on the 2nd day of their approach. She wrote that the response was in Hegemony Standard, which should not have been possible in year 1 because Hegemony Standard had been formalized only 6 months prior, and the sector was not on any prior contact list. She wrote that the response was polite. She wrote that it made a single request. Please do not come further. We are not ready to be known yet. She wrote that the captain had turned the ship around without discussion. She wrote that nobody talked about it on the return journey. She wrote that she understood without being told that this was the correct decision and that she had been trying for 2 years to understand why she understood that so completely, and she still did not have an answer. She wrote, I think there is a kind of thing you know without knowing how, the way you know not to make a sound in a forest that has gone too quiet. That was the last line. I closed the file. Outside my office window, the Bureau District's evening lights were starting to come on, one by one, across the skyline. I watched them for a moment. Sector 7, Auric Null, was still on my screen. Gray, quiet. 300 years of a word that had started to feel less like a gap in knowledge and more like a held breath. They had asked not to be known yet. The word yet had been in that sentence for 300 years. I put my hand on my keyboard. I did not type anything. Not yet. I found the first ghost record on a Wednesday, which felt appropriate because Wednesdays had always seemed like the day the universe chose to be inconvenient. The hegemony archive system was not designed for deep historical searching. It was designed for retrieval, for looking up things you already knew existed, searching for things that had been deliberately filed under the wrong headers, cross-referenced with deactivated process codes, and attached to personnel files of people 300 years gone required a different approach entirely. It required the kind of searching that felt less like research and more like following a trail of breadcrumbs left by people who had not wanted the trail to be obvious, but had not quite been able to make themselves destroy it entirely. I understood that feeling already, and it had only been 2 days. The first record was from year 22, a Kethsulari probe mission, jointly sponsored by their Academy of Stellar Sciences and the Early Hegemony Exploration Committee. The Kethsulari were meticulous record keepers, far more so than us, and they filed expedition reports in triplicate with appendices. The main report was clean, formal, unremarkable. Sector 7, Auric Null approached. Anomalous signal detected at the boundary. Mission suspended. Withdrawal per consensus of the Joint Committee. What consensus? The report did not say. The appendix was missing. But the appendix had an index entry, because Kethsulari protocol required index entries even for removed documents. The index listed it as Appendix C, Mission Notes, Personal Observations of Chief Survey Officer Don Rowe, withdrawn per mutual agreement. Withdrawn per mutual agreement with whom? No answer in the file, but the date of the withdrawal was 1 day after the mission's return. Someone had agreed to remove it very quickly. I searched for Don Rowe. Retired, year 48. Long career. No mention of the year 22 expedition in any of his later work, which was strange because chief survey officers typically built careers on notable missions. Anomalous signals at undesignated sectors were notable. You would cite that. You would reference it in papers, in applications, in department meetings. He never did. I found the second ghost record inside a Draven collective boundary survey from year 90. The Draven had approached 7 Auric Null from the opposite side, the rimward approach, and their survey logs were embedded in a larger report on a dozen sectors simultaneously. Easy to miss, easy to leave in place because removing it would have required restructuring a 100-page document. Their note was 4 lines. Sector Edge encountered. Boundary markers present non-standard design. Designation recommended, unstable. Reclassification per treaty. What treaty? I searched every treaty database in the Bureau. No Draven Hegemony treaty from year 90 referenced Sector 7 Auric Null. No treaty from any year referenced it. The word treaty in that context was pointing at an agreement that had either never been formally made or had been made in a room where nobody took official notes. The boundary markers, though. I went back to that line. Boundary markers present non-standard design. Someone had placed physical markers at the boundary of 7 Auric Null, markers the Draven did not recognize. They had seen them, noted them, called them non-standard, and turned their ships around. And then in the formal record they had called it a treaty, which meant the markers had communicated something well enough that a species of experienced frontier surveyors had understood what they meant. I found the third ghost record in a stack of decommissioned mission logs from year 150, inside the personal effects archive of a junior officer named Ben Callie, who had served on a hegemony survey vessel called the Outer Margin that had apparently gotten quite close to 7 Auric Null before doing what everyone else had done. Ben Callie had been thorough in a way that archivists often miss because thoroughness, when it looks like tedium, gets skimmed. He had filed his personal log entries as part of his effects clearance. All of them. Dozens of routine entries about meals and shift schedules, and a running complaint about the water temperature in cabin 7. And one entry from the day, The outer margin reached the edge of 7 auric null. He wrote, "We saw one of them today, standing at the boundary, just standing there watching us approach. It was close enough that we had visual. It waved. Not a signal wave. The other kind. The kind you do when you see someone you recognize from a distance." We waved back. We turned around. Nobody said why. The captain didn't give an order. We just turned around, all of us knowing at the same time, the way you know things in a dream. I put my hand over my mouth. I sat like that for a while. 11 expeditions total. I had found them all now, pieced together from missing appendices and strange treaty references and personal log entries filed under tedium. 11 approaches over 300 years from 6 different species, via 4 different directions. 11 withdrawals. And not one of them had filed a formal contact report. Not one had returned and stood in front of a committee and said, "We saw one, it waved, we understood something we cannot explain, and we left." They had all come home and quietly agreed, separately with no coordination, to file something that wasn't quite a lie and wasn't quite the truth. Anomalous signal, unstable boundary, survey suspended, consensus of the committee, and buried underneath in personal logs and removed appendices and index entries pointing at nothing, the real record. One of them waved. We left. I looked at my 11 files. I had organized them by date across my desk display, a timeline of deliberate not looking stretching 300 years, and I thought about the fact that none of these crews had ever met each other. They had returned to different home ports, different species, different eras. A Kethsulari survey chief in year 22 had never spoken to a hegemony junior officer in year 150. But they had made the same choice. Every single one. I tried to think of another explanation. Maybe the signal at the boundary had been genuinely hazardous. Maybe the markers were warnings, the kind you do not ignore. Maybe this was simple self-preservation instinct operating correctly in each case. Except Ben Callie had written, it waved, not a signal wave, the other kind. The kind you give someone you recognize. The kind you give to a neighbor. I reached for my coffee mug, which I had moved slightly to the left of its usual position sometime in the last hour without noticing. I moved it back. Then I moved it to the left again. Then I set it down in a third position entirely and looked at it. My supervisor's name was Lena Ward. She was in her office, which shared a wall with mine. I had worked alongside Lena for 14 years. I knew the sound of her footsteps and the specific way she knocked before opening a door, and the fact that she kept a small plant on her windowsill that she had never once watered and somehow never died. I had a reason to knock on her door. I had 11 ghost records and a sector that had been sitting under the word unknown for 300 years. That was a supervisor conversation. That was, in fact, exactly the kind of thing the chain of command existed for. I stood up. I sat back down. I thought about the automated process code that had closed my inquiry in 4 seconds. I thought about Lena specifically, and the way she had looked at me yesterday morning when I had mentioned, casually, that I was auditing the Year 1 designations for the quarterly review. She had said, "Fine, perfectly normal, carry on." She had said it without looking up from her screen. But I had heard her typing stop. Just for a second. I pulled the incident report template up on my screen. I spent the next 4 hours formatting it. Every margin aligned, every heading in the correct weight. I adjusted the spacing on the reference section 3 times. I created a table of contents. I cross-referenced all 11 ghost records with proper archive citations. I wrote a summary that was precise and complete and covered every relevant fact in clear, formal language. I did not file it. It sat on my screen, perfect and unsubmitted, and I went back to Ben Callie's entry. One of them waved. We waved back. We turned around. Nobody said why. I looked at the entry, and I looked at my perfect report, and I thought about 30 other cartographers in this bureau, in buildings like this one across the hegemony's territory, who had probably at some point noticed that gray square and moved on, because the gray square had never asked them for anything, and there was always more work. They asked us not to come further. Not ready to be known yet. Yet. I saved the report. I did not file it. I labeled the file with a date and a case number, and put it in a folder I created under my own employee directory, which was not an official archive location, but which was also not a location that an automated process code designed 90 years ago would be looking for. Then I opened a new search window and typed, Sector 7 Auric Null, Original Survey Vessel, Prevailing Standard, Year 1, Physical Archive Records. If the digital files had been managed this carefully, there might be something in the physical archive that no one had thought to manage. Physical archives were on Sublevel 4. I had never been to Sublevel 4. I took the stairs. Sublevel 4 smelled like 4 centuries of paper and slow air. The lights came on in sections as I walked, motion-triggered, each one flickering once before settling, so that I moved through the archive in a small traveling pool of light with darkness ahead and darkness behind. The physical archive was organized by vessel name, then year, then document type. I found the prevailing standards section in the far corner, behind a row of Kethsulari mission crates that someone had stored here decades ago without registering them in the digital index. The prevailing standard had a single shelf. Most early vessels did. 30 years of service, a few dozen missions, a modest physical footprint. I pulled the Year 1 box. Inside, standard mission logs, crew manifests, equipment inventories. Nothing I had not already seen in digital form. I went through each item carefully, the way you go through a room when you are looking for something you cannot name. At the very back of the box, under a set of navigation charts that had been folded incorrectly and never properly refolded, was a file that was not in the digital catalog. It was thin, 1 folder, 3 sheets of paper inside. The cover sheet was a standard bureau designation form, Year 1 format, identical to the one I had found digitally except for one difference. The digital version's rationale field read, they asked us not to. This one was the original, and the original rationale field was longer. It read, they asked us not to come further at this time. The request was politely made and clearly communicated. The captain and crew are in agreement that the request should be honored. We recommend no follow-up survey. We recommend no diplomatic contact. We recommend the sector be designated in a manner that does not invite inquiry. We recommend this because of what they told us during the communication. The second sheet was the communication log. I stood in the dark archive with the pool of light over my head and read it. The communication had lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The entity who contacted the prevailing standard had spoken in early hegemony standard, accented but fluent. It had explained that the sector contained a civilization in a specific stage of its development, a stage the entity described as not yet oriented toward external engagement. It had said that contact at this time would be, in its word, premature. It had then said something that the survey captain had underlined twice on the original transcript. It had said, we will reach out when we are ready. We ask only that the space remain ours until then. We understand this is an unusual request. We appreciate that you are considering it. The captain had written in the margin, in handwriting I recognized as older standard cursive. They were so reasonable about it. That was what made me certain. The third sheet was not a bureau document. It was a personal letter, handwritten, addressed to no one, from a handwriting I did not recognize. It was not signed with a name. It was dated 3 days after the prevailing standard's return, which would have been before the formal archive submission. It read, I have been trying to think about how to explain what I understood during those 4 minutes. I am not sure I can explain it without sounding as though something was wrong with me. Nothing was wrong with me. I was perfectly alert. I am a trained survey professional. I do not imagine things. But during those 4 minutes, I had the distinct and unshakable sense that I was speaking with something that was being patient with us. Not impatient, not condescending, patient in the way a very capable person is patient with someone who is doing their best and needs a little more time. And when the communication ended, I thought, they will be fine. Whatever they are, wherever they are going, they will be absolutely fine. And I thought, we should stay out of the way. I have thought about this every day since. I do not regret the decision. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the folder. I put the folder under my arm. Then I stood in the archive for a long time, not because I needed to think, but because thinking had mostly finished, and what was left was something closer to understanding, and understanding needed a moment to settle. 300 years. Not a mistake, not an oversight, not a filing gap. A choice, made by a survey captain in year 1 who had heard 4 minutes of communication from something patient and capable, and not yet ready to be known, and had come home and written a recommendation in the most boring administrative language available because boring administrative language was the best armor she had. Designate it in a manner that does not invite inquiry. And they had, and it had worked. For 300 years, the gray square had sat quietly on the map, and every cartographer who noticed it had, on some level, received the same signal that Ben Callie had described. The feeling of turning around without an order, the feeling of knowing without being told. Except me. Or rather, I had received the signal. I had felt the draft from a window I could not see. I had just decided to go looking for the window. I took the letter upstairs. I sat at my desk and put it next to my keyboard and looked at it next to my formatted, unsubmitted report and my cold coffee and my misplaced mug. And I thought about what Calla Oren had written in her final note. We are not ready to be known yet. Yet. That word. In year 1, that word had meant, not now. But we were now in year 301. I pulled up the Hegemony First Contact Protocol. It was an old document, designed in year 12 for civilizations that had not yet developed interstellar travel, civilizations the hegemony was approaching with care and considered caution. It was not really a document anyone used for a civilization that had already spoken to us, but it was the only formal protocol I had. It specified a standard survey ping, a structured signal in hegemony standard, identifying the sending vessel and bureau, requesting acknowledgement if any party wished to receive it. The diplomatic equivalent of knocking on a door very slowly. Very slowly, because you were hoping that if no one was home, the knock would not carry. I looked at the protocol. I looked at the folder from sublevel 4. I looked at 300 years of ghost records arranged in a timeline across my screen. They will reach out when they are ready. They had not reached out. I had found them. That was different. The survey captain's margin note said they were so reasonable about it. That was what made me certain. I thought about reasonable. I thought about a civilization that had asked politely, in good hegemony standard, for space and time, and had said we appreciate that you are considering it, as though the consideration was a gift and not just the correct thing to do. A civilization that had left boundary markers that communicated clearly enough to turn back 6 different species without a word. A civilization that had once sent one of its own to stand at the edge and wave. Not a signal wave. The other kind. I opened the first contact protocol. I set the target coordinates to Sector 7, Auric Null. I did not type the transmission yet. I just set the coordinates and watched the cursor blink in the message field and felt, for the first time in 22 years of forms and spreadsheets and legacy file formats, that I was sitting at a desk in the middle of something that actually mattered. My chair creaked when I leaned forward. I typed, "This is Va Sekar, Grade 7 Cartographer, Hegemony Bureau of Territorial Survey. We are transmitting in accordance with Standard Acknowledgement Protocol. No action is required if no response is desired." I stopped. I deleted the last sentence. I typed instead, "We found your original request. "We are sorry for the delay in responding." I looked at that for a moment. I deleted it too. I went back to the original protocol language. Clean, formal, the knock at the door that hoped no one was home. Then I hit transmit. And I waited. The response came in 11 minutes. I know exactly how long it took because I watched the clock in the corner of my screen without blinking for all 11 of those minutes, which I am aware is not a normal thing to do, but the circumstances were not producing normal behavior in me. The message was short. It said, "Hello, we have been waiting for you to ask. We were not sure what was taking so long." I read it. I read it again. I looked at the encryption signature on the transmission. It matched hegemony standard encoding protocols. Current version. Not the year 1 version, not the year 150 version. The version updated 6 months ago, classified distribution, Bureau of Territorial Survey access only. They were using our current encryption. We had published that update internally 6 months ago. I checked the time on the message. 11 minutes after my transmission. The distance to Sector 7 Auric Null at standard signal propagation speed was 26 minutes each way. They had responded in 11 minutes. Either they had been listening for my signal before I sent it, or the signal had reached them faster than physics allowed, or they were already much closer than the map said they were. I moved my coffee mug to the left, then back, then to a completely new position on the right side of my desk where it had never been before. I looked at the mug. I looked at the message. I checked the encryption signature a third time, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to do something procedural. Then a second message arrived. It said, "We sent someone to the boundary once about 280 years ago. We hoped that would be enough. Was it rude? We have been discussing whether it was rude." I thought about Ben Callie. I thought about his entry. One of them waved, not a signal wave, the other kind. 280 years of wondering if the wave had been rude. I put my hands flat on my desk. I breathed in. I breathed out. I did not yet type a response, because I wanted my response to be correct, and I could feel myself approaching the situation the way you approach something in the dark, slowly, with one hand out, not because you are afraid, but because you do not want to knock anything over. The third message arrived before I had typed anything. It said, "Your boundary records are incorrect, by the way. We did not want to mention it before introductions, but since you are a cartographer, you would want to know." And then a file attached. The file was 47 megabytes. That was not a large file by modern standards, but for a message transmitted via standard first contact protocol, which had a practical data limit of about 2 megabytes, it was impossible. The file had arrived anyway. I opened it. It was a map. Hegemony space. Every sector, every claim, every survey route, every named system, every unnamed system we had cataloged in 300 years of bureau work. It was complete and accurate and current. I could see my own sector's most recent updates in it, including a boundary correction I had submitted 4 weeks ago. It was our map, and it was covered in handwriting. Not literally handwriting, but the data annotation style was the equivalent. Small, precise notes attached to dozens of locations, corrections, a few question marks next to areas we had surveyed sloppily, observations on gravitational drift we had not yet measured, a short note on one of our deprim stations that said, simply, "We recommend reinforcing the eastern support structure. Subsurface instability. No urgency." In the top right corner of the file was a header note. It read, "We have been maintaining this in case it was useful. We were not sure when to offer it. We did not want to presume." I sat back. The chair creaked. Below the header, in smaller notation, the boundaries shown for our own territory are approximate. The actual extent is somewhat larger. We did not feel it was appropriate to put our own full boundaries on your map without asking first. Somewhat larger. I had a sudden and very clear mental image of a person politely standing in a doorway for 300 years, holding a completed version of your homework, waiting to be acknowledged before coming in. I looked at the notes on the map. They were thorough, careful. There were timestamps on some of the annotations, and the timestamps stretched back over 200 years, which meant they had been maintaining our map, correcting it, updating it, for longer than most of the current bureau had existed. For no reason except, apparently, the off chance that we would eventually ask. I found my voice in some technical sense, meaning my fingers found the keyboard. I typed. The wave was not rude. One of our officers wrote about it 280 years ago. He said he understood without being told. He said it was the right choice. I sent it. The response came in 3 minutes this time. It said, "We are glad." He waved back. "We have thought about that as well." Then we should introduce ourselves properly. We have been referring to your people as the Bureau folk in our internal records. We hope that is not offensive. It seemed accurate. I looked at my office, the filing cabinet with the bent handle, the dead plant Lena Ward had on her windowsill through the wall, the sublevel 4 folder on my desk, the year 1 designation form with its one short rationale. They asked us not to. I typed, "It is accurate. How should we refer to you?" The response took 8 minutes. When it came, it was longer than the others. It said, "We are usually referred to by name, the same way individuals are, but collectively in your language, the closest accurate term is probably simply people. We have not needed a collective designation before because we have not had external neighbors who needed one. That is a new thing for us. Then it is a good new thing. Then we have a question, if we may, the designation on your maps, unknown. We saw it reflected in the probe signals over the years. We assumed it was the polite choice, given our request. Was that correct?" I thought about the year 1 captain. Designate it in a manner that does not invite inquiry. I typed, "Yes." It was the most respectful word we had for something we were asked not to examine. 3 minutes. Then that is genuinely touching. Thank you, we will pass that along. There will be some relief. Relief. 300 years of sitting inside a word on someone else's map, and hopping it had been chosen with care. I realized I was smiling. I had not smiled at work since a very funny filing error in year 14 of my bureau tenure, and that had been a different kind of smile. This one was strange. It felt the way the letter from sublevel 4 had felt when I read the last line. They will be absolutely fine, and we should stay out of the way. They were fine. They were here. And they were asking if a 300-year-old act of institutional bureaucratic courtesy had landed correctly. I typed, "It landed correctly." Then, because I was still a cartographer, because it was still my job, because the map file was sitting open on my screen with its careful notes, and its polite corrections and its header that said we did not want to presume. May I ask a question? The response was immediate. Yes. I typed the boundary markers from year 90, the ones the Draven survey team described as non-standard design. What did they say? The response took 5 minutes. Then they said in the most widely legible symbolic format we could design the following: "We are home. Please knock." I put my hand over my mouth for the second time in 3 days. I sat there for a long time. Outside my window, the bureau district was fully dark now, evening fully settled, and the lights across the skyline were all on. Inside, my office was lit by screen glow, the map file open, 47 megabytes of 300 years of someone paying attention to us quietly, while we paid careful, respectful attention to not looking at them. Please knock. I had knocked. It had taken 300 years. I typed, "We are sorry it took so long." 4 minutes. Then do not be. You were careful. That tells us something important about you. Then, would you like to see the rest of the map? On the morning I submitted the reclassification report, the coffee machine in the bureau kitchen was broken. which felt like the universe maintaining a certain consistency. I had been at my desk since before sunrise. The folder from Sublevel 4 was on my left side. The annotated map file was on my right. In front of me was the reclassification form, which I had been filling out for 2 hours, not because it was long. It was in fact a short form, but because each field required more thought than any field I had ever filled out in 22 years. The primary designation field had a drop-down menu. Unknown, uninhabited, unclaimed, survey pending, disputed, protected, allied. Restricted, other. I had clicked through all of them twice. None of them were right. Unknown had been a courtesy. It had done its job for 300 years with quiet dignity, and it deserved to be retired properly. Uninhabited was wrong in the obvious way. Unclaimed had the wrong weight, implying something available when nothing here was available. Survey pending was almost funny. Allied was premature. Restricted implied we had any authority over the space, which increasingly seemed like a category error. I clicked Other. The notes field appeared below it. 500 characters, hegemony standard format, mandatory for other designations. I had drafted 6 versions over the past week. The first 3 had been formal bureau language drafts that accurately conveyed the situation in correct bureaucratic terminology. They were good drafts. They were complete. They did not feel right. The 4th draft had tried to explain the ghost records, the 11 expeditions, the Year 1 letter, the Sublevel 4 folder. It was 412 words and exceeded the character limit by approximately 3,000 characters. The 5th draft was 2 sentences. The 6th draft was the one I used. I typed, Sector 7, Auric Null is occupied by a spacefaring civilization of confirmed communicative capacity, confirmed awareness of hegemony territorial operations, and confirmed non-aggressive orientation. They requested this designation in Year 1. We recommend formal diplomatic acknowledgement subject to their preferred timeline. I looked at it. I deleted the last sentence. I typed, they asked us not to bother them. We should ask if that has changed. 300 years of institutional memory, the ghost records, the letter from Sublevel 4, Ben Callis wave, the Year 1 captain's margin note, the boundary markers that said please knock, all of it compressed into 2 plain sentences that were, I had decided, more honest than 400 technical words. I moved my coffee mug to its correct position. I submitted the form. Then I opened the contact interface and typed, we have changed your sector designation on our maps. The response was 4 minutes. Good, what is it now? I typed Other. 30 seconds. We appreciate the honesty. Then, is there a notes field? I smiled. I typed yes. 4 minutes. Then, what did you write? I looked at my submitted report on the secondary screen. The clean bureau form with its correctly formatted headers and its 2 plain sentences in the notes field that were going to cause, I was fairly certain, a significant administrative conversation at the council level within the next 2 weeks. I typed, I wrote that you asked us not to bother you and that we should ask if that has changed. 2 minutes. Then that is the correct question. Well done. Then, before I could respond, the answer is that it has changed. We have been thinking about this for some time. The waving was an early attempt to indicate interest. We apologize that it was unclear. I thought about Ben Callis sitting at his port, writing his log entry, saying they waved and we understood and we left. I thought about a civilization standing at a boundary for 280 years, occasionally sending one of their own to the edge, wondering if the wave had been received as an invitation or a farewell. Both, I typed. It was received as both. We understood the invitation. We also understood the request inside it. 3 minutes, the longest gap so far. Then, yes, that is exactly right. You are good at this. Then we would like to propose a meeting, a formal one. We are aware this requires your council's approval. We are prepared to wait. We have been waiting. Waiting is something we are practiced at. 280 years of boundary waving, 300 years of maintaining our maps, 11 ships carefully turned around, a note in year 1 that said yet. Yes, I typed. I will present the request to the council. Then, because I was a grade 7 cartographer and not a diplomat, and was going to need to explain all of this to people who would have many questions, this may take some time. The council will need to review the situation. 40 seconds. We understand. We will note your name in our records as the point of contact if that is acceptable. It is acceptable, I typed. Then Vasekar, is that the correct form of address? Yes. A pause. Then, we have been calling your people the Bureau folk for 300 years. We would like to know what you call yourselves, the way you refer to your whole civilization, if you have such a word. I looked at the question. It was simple. It should have taken 2 seconds. But I sat with it because it had the quality of the first question in a very long conversation, the kind of question that sets the shape of everything that follows, and I wanted to answer it in a way that was as carefully chosen as their boundary markers. We call ourselves many things, I typed. We are not very unified about it. A pause. Then neither are we. Perhaps that is a good starting point. The coffee machine was still broken in the kitchen. I knew because I could hear Lena Ward's footsteps going to it and coming back and going to it again. She did that every morning. She had done it every morning for 14 years. She would complain about it at 10 o'clock, which was her established ritual. I heard her knock on my door. She opened it before I answered, which was also her ritual, and stood in the doorframe with her arms crossed, and looked at my screen, which had the contact interface open and the annotated map file open, and the submitted reclassification form on the secondary display. She was quiet for a long moment. I turned my chair to face her. She looked at the sublevel 4 folder on my desk. She said, "You went to the physical archive." I said, "Yes." She looked at the contact interface. She said, "You sent a ping." I said, "Yes." She said, "And they responded." I said, "They have been waiting 300 years. They said they were not sure what was taking so long." Lena looked at the annotated map on my screen. 200 years of careful notes in the margins of our own survey work. Corrections we had not known we needed. A recommendation to reinforce a station support structure we had not yet examined. She said, "How much of the map have they sent?" I said, 47 megabytes so far. They offered to send the rest. She said, "How much rest is there?" I typed the question. The response came in 2 minutes. 2 terabytes. We update it regularly. It covers the full known galactic survey, not just hegemony space. We have been mapping for a long time. I read it aloud. Lena was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "The council is going to be difficult about this." I said, "Yes." She said, "You will need support in that meeting." I said, "I know." She looked at the submitted reclassification form, the notes field, 2 plain sentences. She said, "Other, you chose other." I said, "None of the existing options were accurate." She said, "The council will want a longer designation." I said, "The longer designation was less honest." She made a noise that was not quite a laugh, but was not one. Then she said, "You should have come to me 2 weeks ago when you found the autoclose code." I said, "I know. I was not sure what I was looking for yet." She said, "Were you also not sure whether I would make it go away?" I looked at her, the plant on her windowsill through the wall, the coffee she was never going to get this morning. I said that too. She nodded once. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "The coffee machine is broken." I said, "I know." She said, "I am going to go get coffee from the place downstairs. When I come back, I want to read everything from the beginning, all of it." I said, "It will take a while." She said, "I have been here for 27 years and nothing interesting has happened once. I have time." She left. I turned back to my screen. I typed to the contact interface, A colleague is going to read the correspondence from the beginning. Is that acceptable? 40 seconds. Of course. The more people who know, the better. We have been a secret long enough. It was never something we wanted to be. Then secrets are tiring. We recommend against them. 300 years of a gray square on a map. 11 careful retreats. One wave at a boundary. A word that was never ignorance. I looked at the reclassification form. Submitted, unchangeable now. The notes field with its 2 sentences sitting in the bureau system waiting for a council reviewer to open it and read it and begin the long, difficult, probably frustrating process of understanding what it meant. I looked at the annotated map. I thought about 2 terabytes waiting to be sent. The full known galactic survey, updated regularly. I looked at the contact interface. Cursor blinking in the reply field. I typed the designation on your map, the label you used for your own space in the version you shared with us. There was no label. Your territory had no name on it. The response came quickly. We were waiting to see what you would call us before deciding what to call ourselves in your direction. It seemed more polite. I sat back. The chair creaked. I thought about a word, the right word. The one that would sit on the map for the next 300 years the way unknown had sat, except this time with its eyes open. Outside, the morning was fully bright now. Somewhere below, Lena was ordering coffee. In the bureau's system, a reclassification form sat in the pending review queue, patient and plain, 2 sentences long. They asked us not to bother them. We should ask if that has changed. I typed into the contact interface. What would you like us to call you? The response took 9 minutes, the longest wait since the first message. When it came, it was short. It said neighbors. I looked at that word for a long time. Then I typed neighbors. I put my coffee mug exactly where it belonged, in the center of the desk, equidistant from both edges, where it had always gone. I did not move it again. I opened the bureau's mapping software. I navigated to Sector 7, Auric Null. I clicked the territory label field. I typed the word. I pressed apply. The gray square that had been unknown for 300 years sat on the map with its new label, quiet and unhurried and open. And outside my window the bureau district moved through its ordinary morning. And somewhere in a space we had been carefully not looking at for 3 centuries, someone was very likely updating our map. They had always been updating our map. We just had not known to say thank you yet. I hit save. Then I opened the contact interface one more time and typed, "We have updated the map again. Your territory now has a label." The response came in 40 seconds. What does it say? I typed neighbors. And after 22 years of cold coffee and broken chairs and legacy file formats, and a galaxy that was mostly paperwork, the response that came back in 30 seconds was the one I had not known I had been waiting for. It said, "Yes, exactly.